When Clara Boone lifted the broken barn beam that four men couldn't budge, the town of Red Hollow stopped laughing. But when she stood between stampeding cattle and a group of terrified children taking hooves meant for their skulls, the whispers finally changed. This is the story of a woman who was never too large for her town. The town just needed time to grow big enough for her. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far Clara's story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll discover why the quietest man in Red Hollow became the one voice that mattered most. The morning sun had barely cleared the eastern ridge when Clara Boone stepped onto the warped planks of Red Hollow's main street, her boots making sounds like distant thunder against wood that groaned under her weight. She carried 2 grain sacks over her shoulder, each one heavy enough to make most men stagger, with the same ease other women carried their market baskets. At 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders broad as a doorframe and hands that could palm a water bucket like it was a teacup, Clara had learned long ago that her presence announced itself whether she wanted it to or not. The morning market was already alive with commerce and gossip. Merchants called out their wares while housewives examined produce with critical eyes. Children darted between wagons, their laughter cutting through the steady hum of frontier business. Clara headed toward Morrison's general store, keeping her gaze fixed straight ahead. She'd made this walk 100 times before. She knew exactly what would happen. "Lord have mercy," someone muttered as she passed. "It's like watching a bear walk on 2 legs." Quiet laughter rippled through a cluster of women near the fabric displays. Clara's jaw tightened, but she didn't slow her stride. At the store's entrance, Old Man Morrison's eyes widened slightly. They always did, before he stepped aside without a word. The doorframe that stood a comfortable 7 feet tall barely cleared her head as she ducked through. "Morning, Mr. Morrison," Clara said, her voice surprisingly soft for someone her size. "Miss Boone?" He nodded curtly, already moving toward the counter to put distance between them. She set the grain sacks down with controlled precision, careful not to let them slam against the floor. Everything Clara did, she did carefully, deliberately, as if she were constantly aware that one wrong move might confirm what everyone already seemed to believe, that she was too rough, too clumsy, too much for polite society. "Need to trade these for supplies," she said, pulling a folded list from her pocket. "Sugar, coffee, lamp oil, and salt if you've got it." Morrison took the list without meeting her eyes. "I'll have it ready in 10 minutes. I'll wait outside." She knew better than to linger inside where her presence made other customers uncomfortable, where women pulled their children closer and men found sudden interest in the ceiling beams, as if checking whether they'd hold. Outside, Clara settled onto the bench near the store's entrance, the same bench she'd claimed as her own through sheer persistence. The wood creaked ominously beneath her, but it held. It always held. Across the square, she could see the familiar rhythms of Red Hollow life. The blacksmith's hammer rang against his anvil in steady beats. The barber swept hair from his shop doorway. 2 young men loaded lumber onto a wagon, their movements synchronized through years of working together. Normal, ordinary, a world that seemed to flow around her like water around a boulder. "Mama, why is that lady so big?" Clara's eyes flicked toward the child. A girl no more than 6, pointing with the brutal honesty only children possess. The mother's face flushed crimson. "Hush!" She grabbed her daughter's hand and pulled her away, whispering harsh corrections that carried just far enough for Clara to hear the shame in them. Clara looked down at her own hands, calloused and strong, resting on her knees. These hands had built her cabin alone, had cleared timber, hauled stones, dug wells, had done work that most men needed help to accomplish. But strength, she'd learned, wasn't the same as belonging. 50 cents says the bench finally gives out today." The voice came from near the hardware store, where 3 ranch hands leaned against the hitching rail, tobacco stains darkening their teeth as they grinned. "Nah, I seen oak support whole barn roofs," another replied. "That bench is probably the strongest thing in town now that she's testing it regular." Their laughter was the familiar kind, not quite cruel enough to confront, but pointed enough to wound. Clara had learned not to react. Reactions only fed them. The town square continued its morning business. Horses stamped and switched their tails at flies. A dog barked somewhere down near the stable. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery, mixing with dust and horse manure and the green scent of cottonwoods that lined the creek. Red Hollow in spring. beautiful in its way, lonely in others. Miss Boone? She looked up to find Morrison in the doorway, her supplies bundled in burlap. All set. That'll be $2 even, minus the grain. Clara stood, fishing coins from her pocket. The bench groaned with relief as her weight lifted. More laughter from the ranch hands. She ignored it, counted out the payment, and collected her bundle. Much obliged. Morrison nodded, already turning back inside. Clara had just shifted the supplies to her shoulder when a commotion erupted near the livery stable. Whoa! Whoa! Damn you! A horse, a big roan gelding, had torn free from the hitching post and was rearing in panic, eyes rolling white. The rope dangled from its halter, and the wooden post lay splintered on the ground. People scattered. A merchant's cart tipped over, spilling apples into the street. The horse's front hooves came down hard enough to crack the boardwalk. Then it reared again, screaming its fear to the morning sky. Somebody grab that rope! Stay back! He'll kill you! Men shouted contradictory advice while keeping their distance. The horse was wild with terror now, spinning and kicking, 1,000 pounds of muscle and panic with nowhere to go but through the crowded square. Clara set her bundle down carefully. She'd grown up around horses, had worked them since she was tall enough to reach a saddle. She knew that panicked look, knew what happened when fear took over completely. Without thinking, or perhaps thinking too clearly, she stepped off the boardwalk into the street. Miss Boone, don't... She didn't hear who said it. She was already moving, her long stride eating up the distance between her and the terrified animal. The horse saw her coming and reared again, front hooves slashing the air at chest height. Clara didn't flinch. Instead, she did something that made the watching crowd gasp. She hummed. Low and steady, a tuneless sound that seemed to come from deep in her chest. Not a song exactly. More like the sound of wind through canyon walls, or water over smooth stones. The horse's ears flicked toward her. She kept humming, kept walking, slow and steady. Her size, usually a source of mockery, suddenly seemed different. Not threatening, but solid. Unmovable as a mountain. The horse's hooves came down. It danced sideways, nostrils flaring, but the panic in its eyes had shifted to uncertainty. Clara hummed and walked. When she was close enough to touch, she extended one hand, palm up, fingers relaxed. The horse's head swung toward her, then away, then back. Its sides heaved with frightened breaths. Easy now, Clara murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever spooked you is gone. You're all right. The horse's ears swiveled, tracking her voice. Slowly, so slowly the watching crowd seemed to hold its collective breath. Clara reached for the trailing rope. Her fingers closed around it. The horse tensed, but didn't bolt. That's it, Clara breathed. Good boy. You're all right now. She gathered the rope carefully, maintaining that low, steady hum in her chest. The horse's breathing began to slow, matching the rhythm of the sound she made. Behind her, the town square had gone completely silent. Clara stroked the horse's neck with her free hand, feeling the sweat and tremors beneath his hide. Who owns this animal? She called out, not turning around. That'd be me. A man stepped forward from the crowd, tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water. He wore work clothes that had seen better days and a hat stained with sweat and dust. Clara recognized him. Nathan Cole. He owned a spread about 5 miles east of town, worked it alone since his father died 2 winters back. She'd seen him in town before, always quiet, always keeping to himself. He approached slowly, reading the horse's mood with practiced eyes. Appreciate that, Miss Boone, he said, taking the rope from her hand. Something spooked him. Maybe a snake. Maybe just a shadow. He's young yet, still learning. He's got good sense underneath the fear, Clara said. Just needs patience. Most things do. Their eyes met for a moment, and Clara saw something there she wasn't used to seeing. No mockery, no discomfort, no judgment, just acknowledgement. Then Nathan turned to lead the horse away, murmuring his own reassurances. The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming in that peculiar way they did after brief excitement. Already the story was being reshaped, polished for later telling. Clara returned to her bundle of supplies, aware of eyes still tracking her movements. Hell of a thing, one of the ranch hands said to his companion. Never seen Hank settle that fast for anyone. Well, she probably weighs as much as he does. Horse probably figured he'd met his match. The laughter was back, comfortable and familiar. Clara picked up her supplies and started the long walk home, her cabin waiting at the edge of town where the prairie began its roll toward distant mountains. She'd walked maybe 100 yards when she heard bootsteps behind her. "Miss Boone?" She turned. Nathan Cole stood there, leading the now calm horse. "I meant what I said," he continued. "I'm grateful. Hank could have hurt himself or someone else. Just did what needed doing. Maybe so, but most folks were content to just shout advice from a safe distance." He paused, seeming to measure his words. "I've got a problem out at my place. Wondering if you might be willing to help." Clara shifted the weight of her bundle. "What kind of problem?" "Barn beam cracked 2 days ago. Main support. I've been trying to shore it up with rope and leverage, but it needs to be lifted and braced proper. I asked around town for help, but..." He shrugged. "Everyone's busy, or says they are." Clara knew what that meant. She'd heard those same excuses when she'd needed help with her own roof last summer. "When?" she asked. "Today, if you're able. I'd pay fair wage." "Don't need payment for being neighborly." "Then I'll feed you lunch. I make a decent stew, and my coffee won't poison you." Despite herself, Clara felt a small smile tug at her mouth. "All right then. Let me drop these supplies at home and I'll head over." "Much obliged." Nathan touched his hat brim. "Ranch is the one with the lightning-struck cottonwood at the gate." "I know it." She did. She knew every ranch, every homestead, every landmark within 20 miles of Red Hollow. When you spent most of your time alone, you learned the land instead of the people. Nathan led his horse back toward the livery, and Clara continued home, her mind already working through the engineering of lifting a barn beam. Weight distribution, leverage points, the angle of the brace, problems with clear solutions. Unlike the problem of fitting into a town that had measured her and found her wanting, her cabin came into view, small but solid, built with her own hands from timber she'd cut and stones she'd hauled from the creek bed. Smoke rose from the chimney. She'd banked the fire that morning, and it would still be going strong. Inside, she set down her supplies and stood for a moment in the quiet. The cabin was sparse but comfortable. A rope bed in one corner, a table and chair she'd made herself, shelves holding her few possessions. Everything built to her scale, which made it all slightly oversized compared to normal furniture. She poured water from the bucket into a basin and washed her face and hands, then changed into her work shirt, canvas, double-stitched, designed to take abuse. Looking at her reflection in the small mirror above the basin, Clara saw what the town saw. A face too angular, too strong. Eyes that held too much watching, too much waiting. A woman who didn't quite fit the mold of what women were supposed to be. She grabbed her work gloves and headed back out. The walk to Nathan's ranch took the better part of an hour. The road wound through scrub brush and prairie grass, past fence lines that marked the boundaries between stubborn dreams and harder realities. Spring had painted the landscape in shades of green and gold. Wildflowers bloomed in patches where water collected during the spring melt. Overhead, hawks circled on thermals, looking for unwary rabbits. Beautiful country. Harsh country. It took strength to survive here, and even strength wasn't always enough. Nathan's ranch appeared as the road crested a low rise. The house was modest, 2 rooms, maybe 3, with a barn that had seen better decades. The lightning-struck cottonwood stood like a sentinel at the gate, one side charred black, the other still green with new growth. Clara found Nathan in the barn, studying the cracked beam with the expression of a man trying to solve a problem through sheer willpower. "Miss Boone," he straightened. "Didn't expect you this quick." Wasn't far. She looked up at the beam. "That's a nasty crack. Started small. I should have fixed it then. Now it's bearing weight wrong, and the whole roof's starting to sag." Clara circled beneath it, examining the damage. The beam, solid oak, probably 18 inches thick, had split along its grain for about 3 feet. Rope had been wrapped around it in an attempt to hold it together, but the weight of the roof was pulling it apart despite the bindings. "You've got a replacement beam?" she asked. "Cut and ready. Just need to get this one out and the new one in before the whole thing comes down." "How are you planning to do it?" Nathan pulled out a collection of rope and pulleys. "Thought I'd rig a system, try to lift it enough to slide the new beam under. But every time I get tension on the rope, the beam shifts wrong and I lose my leverage." Clara studied the setup. Problem is you're trying to lift and brace at the same time. Need two people. One to lift, one to set the new beam. That's what I figured. That's why I asked around town. Nathan's jaw tightened. Got a lot of reasons why folks couldn't help. All of them polite, most of them lies. Clara knew that game. She'd played it from the other side. Well, she said, pulling on her work gloves. Let's see what we can do. For the next hour, they worked in a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Nathan positioned his new beam while Clara examined the old one, testing weak points, calculating the best angle for the lift. We're going to need to support the roof independent of the beam before we pull it, Clara said. Otherwise, the whole thing will come down on our heads. I've got posts we can use as temporary braces. They set the posts, working in tandem to position them exactly right. Nathan was good at this, anticipating what was needed, moving with efficiency born of years working alone. When the temporary supports were solid, Clara positioned herself under the damaged beam. You sure about this? Nathan asked. That beam's got to weigh 300 pounds, easy. I'm sure. When I lift, you pull it free and get the new one positioned. Soon as I say when, you secure it. Clara, Miss Boone, if that beam shifts wrong, it won't. She set her feet wide, bent her knees, and positioned her shoulders under the beam. Ready? Nathan gripped the damaged beam, ready to guide it. Ready! Clara took a breath, set her core, and lifted. The beam rose. Slowly, steadily, with a grinding protest from wood and nail. Clara's legs trembled with the effort, muscles burning, but she held it. Pull, she grunted. Nathan yanked the damaged beam free. It came away with a screech of nails and a shower of dust and wood splinters. New one, Clara gasped. Now! Nathan was already there, sliding the replacement beam into position. It was heavy, fresh-cut oak, still green, but between them they muscled it into place. Brace it, Clara said. Nathan hammered the securing nails with swift, sure strikes. When the fourth nail was set, Clara slowly lowered her arms. The beam held. The roof held. They both stood there for a moment, breathing hard, staring up at their work. I'll be damned, Nathan said quietly. We actually did it. Clara flexed her shoulders, feeling the burn of exertion. Told you it needed 2 people. I tried to get 4 men to help me last week. They couldn't get it to budge. Nathan looked at her with something like wonder. How strong are you? Clara shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. Strong enough? That's... Nathan stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. That's a gift. Not what most folks call it. Most folks are fools. The simple statement, delivered without heat or judgment, landed between them like something precious. Before Clara could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the pasture. Papa! Papa! Help! A young voice, high with panic. Nathan was already running. Clara followed, her longer stride keeping pace easily. They rounded the barn to find 2 boys, maybe 10 and 12, backing away from the fence line where a calf had gotten its leg caught in broken rails. The animal was thrashing, terrified, and the boys were too close, well within range of those flailing hooves. Get back, Nathan shouted. But the younger boy was frozen, staring at the trapped calf with wide eyes. Clara saw it before Nathan did, the calf's hoof swinging in a wild arc, heading straight for the boy's head. She moved. Later, she wouldn't remember making the decision, wouldn't remember thinking it through. She just moved, her body making calculations her mind had no time for. She hit the boy with her shoulder, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to knock him clear. The calf's hoof caught her instead, a solid blow to the ribs that would have caved in the boy's skull. Clara grunted but stayed on her feet, positioning herself between the panicked animal and the children. Nathan, she said, her voice tight with pain. Get them clear. Nathan grabbed both boys and pulled them back while Clara focused on the calf. It was trapped by its right foreleg, caught between 2 broken rails that had splintered inward. Every time it pulled, the wood dug deeper, causing more pain, more panic. Easy, Clara murmured, using that same low hum she'd used with the horse. Easy now, little one. She edged closer, talking constantly, letting the calf hear her voice. When she was close enough, she reached down and gripped the broken rails. With a quick twist of her powerful hands, she snapped the wood like kindling. The calf stumbled free, immediately bolting toward its mother on the far side of the pasture. Clara straightened slowly, one hand pressed to her ribs where the hoof had connected. She could already feel the bruise forming, deep and angry. "Boys, you all right?" Nathan was checking them over, his hands shaking slightly with adrenaline. "Yes, Papa," the younger one said, "but that lady, she got hit." "I saw." Nathan's eyes found Clara's. "You took that kick meant for Tommy." Clara shrugged, then winced at the movement. "Boy's head is softer than my ribs made sense." "You could have been seriously hurt, but I wasn't." Clara, whatever he was going to say was cut off by a new crisis. The wind, which had been building all afternoon, suddenly gusted with enough force to rattle the barn walls. Out in the pasture, the cattle lifted their heads, sensing the change. And the main gate, the heavy gate that kept the herd contained, began to swing open. "The latch!" Nathan started running. "The wind's pulling the latch!" Clara saw the problem immediately. The gate was massive, designed to hold against a stampede, and the wind was dragging it open against the gravity latch. Nathan was running for it, but he was too far away, and the cattle were already starting to move toward the opening. If they got through, they'd scatter across open range. It would take days to round them up, and some would be lost to predators or the elements. Clara ran. Her long legs ate up the distance, and she reached the gate just as it swung full open. The cattle were surging forward now, following their instinct to move when an opening appeared. Without thinking, Clara grabbed the gate and hauled it closed. The wind fought her, a living force trying to tear the heavy wood from her grip. The first of the cattle hit the gate, pushing against it, adding their weight to the wind's force. Clara set her feet and held. Her shoulders screamed, her back burned. The bruise on her ribs sent spikes of pain through her chest with every breath. She held. Nathan reached the latch, his hands fumbling with the mechanism that had been loosened by the wind's assault. "Almost got it," he gasped. The cattle pushed harder. The wind gusted stronger. Clara's boots began to slide in the dirt. She shifted her weight, dropped her center of gravity lower, and pushed back with everything she had. The wood creaked. The hinges groaned. "Got it." Nathan slammed the latch home. The gate was secure. Clara released her grip slowly, her hands shaking with exhaustion. She stepped back and nearly fell. Nathan caught her elbow. "Steady. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You took a kick to the ribs and just held a gate against wind and cattle that would have knocked most men flat." Clara looked at the gate, at the cattle now milling peacefully behind it, at the ranch that still stood intact. "Like I said," she repeated quietly, "just did what needed doing." From the barn, the two boys watched with expressions of pure awe. "That lady is strong as 10 men, the younger one whispered. "Stronger," his brother replied. Nathan heard them but didn't correct them. Instead, he looked at Clara with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Come inside, Martha," he said. "You need to sit down, and I need to check those ribs. Then I'm feeding you that stew I promised, and you're not arguing." Clara wanted to protest, wanted to say she was fine, that she needed to get home, but the truth was, her ribs hurt like hell, and she was tired, and the idea of sitting down in someone else's space, of being welcome somewhere, was more appealing than she wanted to admit. "All right," she said. They walked to the house together, the boys trailing behind at a respectful distance, while overhead the wind continued to build, carrying with it the scent of coming rain and the promise of storm. Inside Nathan's kitchen, Clara sat at the table, a sturdy piece of furniture that, mercifully, didn't groan under her weight, while Nathan heated water on the stove. The house was simple but clean. Everything had its place, organized with the precision of someone who'd learned to be self-sufficient. A few photographs on the mantel showed a woman who must have been Nathan's mother, and an older man with Nathan's eyes. "Your ribs," Nathan said, bringing over a basin of warm water and a clean cloth. "You should let me check." Clara hesitated, then unbuttoned her shirt enough to reveal the bruise already blooming across her right side. Nathan's jaw tightened. "That's going to be painful for a while. I've had worse." "I don't doubt it." He wrung out the cloth and handed it to her. "But you shouldn't have had to take that hit at all. Your boy shouldn't have to learn what a hoof to the head feels like." "No," Nathan agreed quietly. "He shouldn't." He moved back to the stove where a pot of stew had been simmering all afternoon. The smell filled the kitchen, beef and potatoes and carrots, seasoned with herbs Clara couldn't quite identify. Boys, Nathan called toward the other room. Come eat. Tommy and his older brother, Jacob, Clara learned, came to the table with the awkward uncertainty of children in the presence of someone new and remarkable. Thank you for saving me, Tommy said quietly, looking at his plate. You're welcome, Claire replied. Are you really stronger than 10 men? Jacob asked. Jacob, Nathan warned. No, it's all right. Claire considered the question. I'm probably stronger than most men, but strength isn't the only thing that matters. Papa says you fixed the barn beam that 4 men couldn't budge, Jacob continued. Your papa and I fixed it together. I lifted, he secured. Neither of us could have done it alone. Nathan served the stew, giving Clara a portion that would have fed 2 normal people. He didn't comment on the size, just set it in front of her like it was the most natural thing in the world. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. The stew was good, better than good. Clara couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for her. Miss Boone, Tommy said suddenly, why do people in town laugh at you? Tommy! Nathan's voice was sharp, but Clara shook her head. He's just asking what he's heard. She set down her spoon, considering how to answer honestly without burdening a child with adult cruelty. People sometimes laugh at things they don't understand, she said finally. I'm different from most women they know. That makes some folks uncomfortable. But you saved me, Tommy said, and you helped Papa. That's good, not different. It can be both, Clara said gently. After dinner, as the sun began its descent toward the western ridges, Nathan walked Clara outside. I meant what I said before, he told her, about most folks being fools. What you did today, all of it, that took courage and strength and skill. The town should see that. The town sees what it wants to see. Then maybe it's time they looked harder. Clara met his eyes, those creekwater eyes that held no mockery, no judgment. Thank you for the meal, she said, and for treating me like I'm just normal. You are normal, Nathan said. The world's just calibrated wrong. Those words stayed with Clara all the way home, through the gathering dusk, past the fence lines and prairie grass and wildflowers blooming in the places where water collected. Back in her cabin, she tended the fire and made coffee and sat at her table, one hand pressed against her bruised ribs. Outside, the wind continued to rise, and in the distance, thunder rumbled over the mountains. Tomorrow, there would be a town gathering at the hall. Dancing and socializing, the monthly ritual where Red Hollow pretended to be more refined than it was. Clara hadn't attended one in over a year, had learned that sometimes the loneliest place you could be was in a room full of people who wished you weren't there. But tomorrow, she thought, might be different. Tomorrow, Nathan Cole would be there. And something about the way he'd looked at her today, like she was exactly the right size for the space she occupied, made her think that maybe, just maybe, it was time to try again. The fire crackled, the coffee grew cold, and Clara sat in her cabin at the edge of town, where the prairie began its roll toward distant mountains, and allowed herself to hope. The storm that had threatened the previous evening broke just before dawn, drumming against Clara's roof with a violence that spoke of spring's final defiance before summer's heat settled over the territory. She lay awake listening to it, her ribs aching with each breath, the bruise having deepened overnight into shades of purple and black that mapped where the calf's hoof had connected. By the time the rain eased to a drizzle, the sun was already climbing, and Clara knew she had a decision to make. The town gathering was tonight. She could stay home, tend her fire, and avoid the whole affair like she had for the past year. Or she could go, knowing full well what waited for her there. The stares, the whispers, the careful distance people maintained as if her difference might be contagious. But Nathan's words kept circling back through her mind. The world's just calibrated wrong. She rose slowly, testing her ribs, and began her morning routine. Coffee first, strong and black. Then breakfast, cornmeal mush with a bit of honey. She ate standing at her window, watching the way the storm had painted the landscape in deeper greens, how the prairie grass bent and swayed like something alive. The dress she pulled from her trunk was simple, dark blue calico, made by her own hands because no dressmaker in Red Hollow would take her measurements without a litany of barely concealed comments. She'd sewn it loose enough for comfort, practical enough for her life, and if it wasn't fashionable by town standards, at least it was clean and whole. Looking at herself in the small mirror, Clara saw what she always saw, a woman too tall, too broad, too much. But today, instead of looking away, She held her own gaze. Strong enough, she thought, remembering Nathan's question. Strong enough to lift what four men couldn't. Strong enough to stand between a child and danger. Strong enough to hold a gate against wind and cattle. Maybe strong enough for this, too. The walk to town took longer than usual. The rain had turned the road to mud in places, and Clara's boots squelched with each step. She passed the Hendersons' place where smoke rose from the chimney and chickens pecked at the ground despite the dampness. Mrs. Henderson was hanging wash on the line, and when she saw Clara, she paused mid-motion, a sheet clutched in her hands. Clara raised a hand in greeting. Mrs. Henderson's response was the barest nod before she turned back to her work. But it was something. More than Clara usually got. Red Hollow emerged from the prairie like it always did, a collection of wooden buildings arranged along a single main street, determined to prove that civilization could take root even in this harsh country. The town hall stood at the far end, the largest structure, built with community labor and civic pride, its bell tower visible from miles away. Already wagons were gathering, families arriving early to claim good spots for their rigs, children running between the wheels while mothers carried baskets of food and fathers gathered in clusters to discuss weather and cattle prices and all the important business of frontier life. Clara approached slowly, aware of the moment when people noticed her. It always happened the same way. Conversations would pause mid-sentence, heads would turn, and a peculiar silence would spread outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. She kept walking. The town hall's interior was already being transformed. Tables lined one wall where women arranged food in careful displays. Lanterns hung from the rafters, ready to be lit when dusk fell. The wooden floor had been swept clean for dancing, and someone had placed wildflowers in jars along the windowsills. Clara Boone. She turned to find Martha Grimes, the baker's wife, standing with two other women whose names Clara couldn't immediately recall. Martha's expression held that particular kind of brightness that meant gossip had already been discussed and positions had been taken. Surprised to see you here, Martha continued. Thought you preferred keeping to yourself. I come when I can, Clara replied evenly. Well, Martha's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I suppose there's room for everyone. The other women said nothing, but their silence spoke volumes. Clara moved toward the food tables, intending to set down the dried apple pie she'd brought. Not fancy, but honest work. As she walked, she felt the weight of attention following her, heard the whispered conversations resuming behind her back. Did you hear what happened at the coal place yesterday? I heard she lifted a barn beam by herself. Can you imagine? Natural strength like that in a woman, it isn't right somehow. My husband says she's stronger than any man in the county. That's exactly the problem. Clara set down her pie and turned to face the hall. More people were arriving now. The Johnsons with their 4 children, the Palmers, the Wexlers, families who'd built their lives here, who knew each other's histories and secrets, who belonged in a way Clara had never quite managed. She found a spot along the wall where she could stand without blocking anyone's path. Being tall meant she could see over most heads, which was useful for watching but terrible for blending in. The afternoon passed in the peculiar rhythm of these gatherings. Children ran wild until their mothers caught them and enforced temporary calm. Men gathered outside to smoke and talk. Women arranged and rearranged the food until everything achieved some unspoken standard of presentation. And Clara stood against her wall, watching it all unfold, feeling like a spectator at a play she'd never been invited to join. Miss Boone. She looked down to find Tommy and Jacob Cole standing in front of her, freshly scrubbed and wearing their Sunday clothes. Nathan stood a few paces behind, talking with the livery owner, but his eyes found hers over the boys' heads. Hello, boys, Clara said. Are you going to dance tonight? Tommy asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood. I don't think so. Why not? Because no one asks, Clara thought. Because the floor creaks under my weight, and people make jokes. Because the last time I tried, 3 years ago, my partner spent the entire dance looking embarrassed and hasn't spoken to me since. Just prefer watching, she said instead. That's silly, Tommy declared. Dancing is fun. Tommy, leave Miss Boone alone, Nathan said, arriving to collect his sons. But his eyes held a question as he looked at Clara. You're here early. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Still does. He hesitated, then said, Boys, go find the Fletcher kids to play with. They ran off with the enthusiasm of children freed from adult supervision, and Nathan moved to stand beside Clara against the wall. "Ribs still hurting?" he asked quietly. "Some. Nothing I can't manage." "You shouldn't have to manage." He watched the gathering crowd with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Half the people in this room owe you thanks for one thing or another. You've helped more folks than they remember." "Helping and being welcomed aren't the same thing." "No," Nathan agreed. "They're not." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the hall fill with bodies and noise, and the particular energy that came from community gathering. "You know what I realized yesterday?" Nathan said finally. "When you were holding that gate, and I was thinking, there's no way one person can hold that. And then you just did. I realized I'd been making the same mistake everyone else makes." "What mistake?" "Thinking that different means less, that because you don't fit the pattern we're used to, something must be wrong." He shook his head. "But there's nothing wrong with you, Clara. The pattern's just too small." Before Clara could respond, a commotion near the door drew their attention. The mayor had arrived, Samuel Garrett, a man who'd built his fortune in cattle and his reputation on loud opinions. He strode into the hall with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to space. "Evening, folks," his voice carried easily over the crowd. "Fine turnout tonight, mighty fine." People gravitated toward him naturally, the way water found low ground. He was the kind of man who commanded attention without asking for it, whose jokes were always funny because he was the one telling them. His eyes swept the room and landed on Clara. She saw the recognition, saw something harden in his expression. "Well," Garrett said loudly enough for half the room to hear, "looks like we've got quite the crowd. Hope the floor's reinforced better than I remember." The laughter that followed was nervous, uncertain, but it was there. Nathan's jaw tightened. "Sam Garrett's an ass." "He's the mayor." "Doesn't make him less of an ass." The musicians began setting up on the small platform at the hall's far end. A fiddle player, someone with a guitar, and old Tom Warren who could make a harmonica sing. They tuned their instruments in that discordant way that always preceded music, and the crowd began to shift in anticipation. Dusk was falling outside, painting the windows in shades of orange and purple. Someone lit the lanterns, and the hall took on a warm glow that softened the rough edges of frontier life. "Ladies and gentlemen," Garrett announced, "let's get this evening started proper. Music!" The fiddle struck up a lively tune, and couples began moving toward the floor. It was always the same dance at these gatherings. The Virginia Reel or something like it, simple enough that everyone knew the steps, complicated enough to be interesting. Clara watched from her wall as the couples formed lines. She recognized most of them, the Wexlers, married 30 years and still moving together with practiced ease. The Johnsons, younger, still learning each other's rhythms. Martha Grimes dancing with her husband, her earlier sharpness softened by music and motion. The dance floor filled and the building itself seemed to come alive with stomping feet and swirling skirts and laughter that had nothing to do with cruelty, just joy and movement and community. "Dance with me." Clara looked at Nathan, certain she'd misheard over the music. "What?" "Dance with me," he repeated, extending his hand. "Nathan, I don't think... I'm not asking what you think. I'm asking you to dance." Clara's heart hammered against her bruised ribs. Every eye in the hall would be on them. Every tongue would wag. The floor would creak, and people would whisper, and it would confirm every joke ever made about her. "The floor," she started. "The floor held a barn beam yesterday. It'll hold us dancing." She looked at his extended hand, calloused from work, steady as stone. "People will talk," she said quietly. "People always talk. Might as well give them something worth talking about." The fiddle soared into a new phrase, the guitar following like a heartbeat underneath. Clara took his hand. The silence that fell wasn't immediate. It spread outward in waves as people noticed, as conversations died mid-sentence, as heads turned and eyes widened. By the time Nathan led Clara onto the floor, the only sounds were the music and the rustle of fabric and the creak of floorboards under their feet. Nathan positioned them in the dance space with deliberate care, finding a spot where the boards were strongest. His hand found hers, his other hand settling at her waist with gentle certainty. "You remember how this goes?" he asked. "It's been a while." "Just follow the music. I'll guide." The fiddle player, old Sam Morrison, the storekeeper's brother, had stopped playing, his bow frozen above the strings. The other musicians faltered, uncertain. Nathan looked at them directly. "You going to play? Or are we dancing in silence?" Sam's bow touched strings again, tentative at first, then stronger. The guitar joined in. The harmonica wove between them, and they danced. Clara had forgotten what it felt like. The rhythm of movement matched to music, the way a good partner could make you feel weightless despite your size. Nathan was a strong lead, confident without being forceful, guiding her through the steps with the same calm competence he brought to everything. The floor creaked beneath them, but it held. Around them, other couples had frozen in place, watching. Some faces showed simple surprise. Others displayed something harder, disapproval perhaps, or the kind of judgment that came from seeing someone break an unspoken rule. Martha Grimes whispered something to her husband. A group of ranch hands near the door exchanged glances and muffled laughter, and then Mayor Garrett's voice cut through the music. "Might want to go easy there, Cole. Floor wasn't built for that kind of weight." The musicians faltered again. Nathan's hand tightened on Clara's waist, not in uncertainty, but in anger, carefully controlled. "Floor's fine, Sam," Nathan called back, not missing a step. "Just concerned for the integrity of public property." "Seems like your concern would be better directed at your own property. Heard your barn roof sagging pretty bad." A few people laughed, genuine laughter this time, at the mayor's expense. Garrett's face reddened. "Now see here. We're dancing, Sam. Either join in or shut up." The boldness of it, a small rancher telling the mayor to shut up in front of half the town, rippled through the crowd like electricity. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the fiddle player grinned and leaned into the music with renewed energy. The other musicians followed, and suddenly the tune wasn't just background anymore. It was defiance set to melody. Nathan swept Clara into a turn, her skirt swirling, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not hope, exactly. Not yet. But something close to it. They made it through 2 full verses before it happened. One of the ranch hands, a thick-built man named Cutler, who Clara had seen mocking her in the market square, suddenly lurched forward. He'd been drinking. That much was obvious from his unsteady gait and too loud laughter. Whether he genuinely stumbled or whether it was deliberate, Clara would never know for certain. But he slammed into her side, the same side where the bruise from the calf's hoof was still angry and fresh, with enough force to knock most people flat. Pain exploded through Clara's ribs, white-hot and stealing breath. She stumbled. The floor groaned. People gasped. Nathan reached for her, but Clara had already caught herself, shifting her weight with the instincts born of a lifetime of being careful, of compensating, of never letting them see you fall. She regained her balance in a heartbeat, her hand still in Nathan's, her feet finding the rhythm of the dance as if nothing had happened. Cutler stood there, swaying slightly, a smirk playing at his mouth. "Oops," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "Didn't see you there. Hard to miss, though, isn't it?" His friends laughed. That particular kind of laughter that said they'd been in on the joke all along. Clara's ribs screamed. Each breath was a knife. But she didn't stop dancing. She met Cutler's eyes for just a moment, long enough for him to see that she knew exactly what he'd done, long enough for him to understand that she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. And then she looked back at Nathan. "Keep going," she said quietly. "Clara, you're hurt." I said keep going. Nathan's eyes searched hers, and whatever he saw there made him nod. He pulled her closer, supporting more of her weight without making it obvious, and they continued the dance. The music played on, the floor creaked but held, and something remarkable happened. Old Tom Warren, playing harmonica, added a trill that hadn't been there before, a little flourish that spoke of approval. The guitar player smiled and picked up the tempo slightly, making the music brighter, bolder. One by one, other couples returned to the floor. Not all of them. Martha Grimes and her husband remained conspicuously seated, and several of the ranch hands stood by the door with crossed arms and sour expressions. But enough couples joined that suddenly Clara and Nathan weren't alone out there. The Wexlers took up position nearby. Young Tommy Fletcher's parents moved into the dance. Even the Palmers, who usually kept to themselves, stepped onto the floor. They weren't making a statement, not overtly. They were just dancing. But in a town like Red Hollow, sometimes dancing was statement enough. When the music finally wound down to its conclusion, applause filled the hall, scattered at first, then building to something genuine. Clara's ribs felt like they were on fire, but she kept her expression neutral as Nathan guided her off the floor. They made it to the far wall before her legs started shaking. "Sit," Nathan commanded, pulling over a chair that groaned ominously but held. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're hurt and you're pushing through it, and while that's admirable, it's also stubborn as hell." He disappeared for a moment and returned with a cup of water. "Drink." Clara drank, grateful for something to do with her hands. Around them, the gathering had resumed its normal rhythm. The musicians struck up another tune. People returned to conversations and food and the business of being social. But something had changed. Clara could feel it in the way people's eyes lingered a moment longer, in the nods she received from people who'd never acknowledged her before, in the space that had somehow shifted from exclusion to something not quite welcome, but not entirely hostile either. "Papa, that was wonderful." Tommy and Jacob appeared, breathless with excitement.
"You showed that mean man," Tommy declared. "He pushed Miss Boone and she didn't even fall down."
"Tommy," Nathan warned, "but it's true. She's the strongest person I ever saw." An older woman Clara didn't recognize approached, her face weathered by years of frontier sun, but her eyes kind. "Young man's right," she said to Clara. "What you did, continuing to dance like that, took more courage than most folks got." She extended a hand. "Sarah Palmer. My husband and I have the spread north of Cole's place." Clara shook her hand, surprised by the gesture. "Clara Boone. I know who you are. Heard you helped Nathan fix his barn yesterday. Heard you saved his boy from getting kicked. About time someone in this town acknowledged that strength comes in different packages." She smiled. "My grandmother was tall as you, Scandinavian stock, worked alongside my grandfather building their homestead. Never apologized for being who she was." "Thank you," Clara managed. Sarah nodded and moved away, leaving Clara slightly stunned. More people approached over the next hour. Not all of them, not even most, but enough to matter. The livery owner thanked her for calming his spooked horse. A young mother mentioned how Clara had helped her carry supplies when she was heavily pregnant last fall. Small acknowledgments, brief conversations, but each one chipped away at the wall of isolation that had surrounded Clara for so long. Nathan stayed close, not hovering, but present, his quiet support a steady thing she could lean against. As the evening wore on and the lanterns burned lower, the music shifted to slower tunes. Couples swayed together in the dim light, and children dozed on benches while their parents talked in low voices. Clara watched it all from her chair, her ribs aching but her heart strangely full. "You should go home and rest," Nathan said quietly. "That bruise needs ice and you need sleep." "I know." "But you're not ready to leave yet." "No." Clara looked around the hall, at the faces lit by lantern light, at the community she'd lived beside but never quite inside. "Not yet." Nathan sat down on the floor beside her chair, the only way to bring himself to her eye level, and they sat together in comfortable silence. Mayor Garrett was holding court near the food tables, his voice carrying over the quieter conversations. He didn't look their way, but the set of his shoulders suggested he was aware of them, aware that his comment about the floor had backfired somehow. "He's not going to forget this," Clara observed. "Don't care. He could make trouble for you. He's got influence." "Let him try." Nathan's voice held steel beneath the quiet. "I'm tired of watching good people get pushed around because they don't fit someone else's narrow idea of acceptable. You spent your whole life making yourself smaller for this town's comfort. Tonight, you took up the space you're entitled to. That's not something to apologize for." Clara looked down at him, this quiet rancher who'd somehow seen her when the rest of the town looked away. "Why?" she asked. "Why stand with me? You could have asked any woman here to dance." "I asked the one I wanted to dance with." "Nathan, you think I haven't noticed?" He shifted to look up at her directly. "You're the first person I call when something needs fixing because I know you'll show up and do it right. You're the one who helped the Fletcher family rebuild after their fire. You're the one who sat with old Mrs. Warren when she was dying and no one else would because they were afraid of the sickness. The town takes and takes from you, and what have they given back? Mockery, and isolation. That's just how it is. That's how it's been. Doesn't mean it's how it has to stay. The music swelled into a final waltz. Around them, couples rose for one last dance before the evening ended. Nathan stood and extended his hand again. "Your ribs," Clara started. "One more dance, then I'll drive you home in my wagon and make sure you've got ice for those ribs and enough firewood to last the week." I know you don't need it. I'm offering it anyway. There's a difference." Clara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. The movement sent pain lancing through her side, but she breathed through it. This time when they stepped onto the floor, no one stopped talking. No one stared. They simply made room, accepting their presence as if it had always been there. The waltz was slower, gentler than the earlier dances. Nathan guided her through it with careful attention to her injury, adjusting his movements to minimize the strain on her ribs. "Thank you," Clara said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me." Nathan's hand tightened on hers. "Anyone with eyes could see you, Clara. Most folks just chose to look away. That's on them, not you." The music carried them through 3 full turns around the floor. Clara's ribs protested every movement, but the pain felt distant somehow, less important than this moment, this feeling of being part of something instead of apart from it. When the final notes faded and the evening officially ended, people began gathering their belongings and collecting their children. The hall emptied slowly, families trickling out into the spring night where stars blazed overhead and the air smelled of rain-washed earth. Nathan brought his wagon around while Clara waited on the hall's front steps. She watched families depart, caught fragments of conversation carried on the night wind. "Did you see them dancing?" "Held herself together after Cutler hit her. That took spine." "Maybe we've been wrong about her." Maybe. It wasn't acceptance, not yet. But it was the beginning of something, and that was more than Clara had dared hope for. Nathan's wagon pulled up, and he helped her climb onto the seat with gentle hands that knew exactly where her injury was and how to avoid it. The ride to her cabin was quiet. The road was still muddy from the morning's rain, and the wagon wheels squelched through puddles that reflected starlight. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness, and the prairie night settled around them like a blanket. When they reached her cabin, Nathan didn't just drop her off. He climbed down, helped her inside, and set about building up her fire while she lit the lamps. "You've got ice?" he asked. "Some. There's a cold box out back where I keep it packed in sawdust." He retrieved it without being asked, wrapped it in a clean cloth, and handed it to her. "Hold that against the bruise. 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off." "You sound like you've had practice." "Raised 2 boys and ran a ranch. You learn about injuries." He looked around her cabin, taking in the sparse but solid construction. "You built this yourself?" "Every beam and board." "It's good work." "It keeps the weather out." Nathan moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "What happened tonight?" he said. "What you did, dancing despite the pain, despite Cutler, despite everything, that mattered. You showed the town something they needed to see." "What's that?" "That you're not going anywhere. That you belong here as much as anyone else, and their opinions don't change that fact." He tipped his hat and stepped out into the night, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts and her aching ribs, and a feeling she couldn't quite name. She held the ice against her bruise and sat at her table, looking around at the cabin she'd built with her own hands, the life she'd carved out on the margins of a town that had never quite made room for her. But tonight, for the first time, the margins had felt a little less lonely. Outside, she heard Nathan's wagon pulling away, the sound of wheels fading into prairie silence, and Clara sat in her small cabin at the edge of Red Hollow, where she'd always lived. But somehow tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like the beginning of something. The ice had melted by the time Clara finally fell asleep that night, the cloth soaked through and the bruise on her ribs still angry despite the treatment. She woke before dawn, as she always did, her body trained to the rhythms of frontier life where daylight was currency too valuable to waste. The morning was cool and clear, last night's rain having scrubbed the sky clean. Clara dressed slowly, testing the range of motion in her torso, cataloging the pain. Bad, but manageable. She'd worked through worse. She was splitting firewood behind her cabin when she heard the wagon approaching. The sun had barely cleared the eastern ridge, and visitors at this hour were rare enough to be noteworthy. Nathan's wagon came into view, Tommy and Jacob visible in the bed behind him. Clara set down her axe and waited, wiping sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. "Morning," Nathan called as he pulled the horses to a stop. "Hope we're not calling too early." "I've been up for an hour." Figured as much. He climbed down, then helped the boys jump from the wagon bed. "Brought some help. Boys have been pestering me since sunrise about coming to see you." Tommy ran forward with the unrestrained energy of childhood. "Miss Boone, Papa says you can teach us how you held the gate in the storm." "Does he now?" "Well," Nathan said, a slight smile playing at his mouth. "They asked. I said it was up to you." Clara looked at the two boys, their faces bright with anticipation, and felt something shift in her chest. No one had ever asked her to teach them anything before. People asked for her strength when they needed heavy lifting, but teaching implied something different. It implied value beyond brute force. "All right," she said. "But first, you tell me what you think the secret is." Jacob, the older boy, spoke up. "Being strong? That's part of it. But strength alone won't hold a gate against wind and cattle if you don't know how to use it. Tommy, what do you think?" The younger boy scrunched his face in concentration. "Holding on real tight?" "Closer. But there's something you're both missing." Clara walked over to the fence post nearest her cabin. "Come here, Jacob. Push against this post as hard as you can." The boy stepped up and shoved with all his might. The post, set deep in the ground and reinforced with stones, didn't budge. "Now push it again, but this time stand with your feet close together." Jacob adjusted his stance and pushed. This time his feet slipped in the dirt and he nearly fell. "See the difference?" Clara asked. "Same strength, different result. It's not just about how hard you push. It's about where your power comes from. Try again, but this time put your feet wide apart, shoulder width or wider." Jacob repositioned and pushed. This time he held firm, his smaller frame stable despite his effort. "Better," Clara said. "Now drop your weight lower, bend your knees." The boy adjusted, and suddenly his push had real force behind it. "That's it," Clara encouraged. "Power comes from your legs, your core, your connection to the ground. When I held that gate, I wasn't using just my arms and shoulders. I was using everything, legs driving down, weight centered low, whole body working as one piece." She demonstrated, setting her stance the way she had during the storm. The wind and the cattle were pushing from one direction. I pushed back from a foundation they couldn't shake. That's the secret, not being strongest, but being most stable. Nathan watched from near the wagon, his expression thoughtful. For the next hour, Clara worked with the boys, teaching them about leverage and balance, about how to move heavy objects by working with physics instead of against it. She showed them how to lift properly, how to distribute weight, how to use their whole body instead of straining individual muscles. Tommy struggled with the concepts at first, his young mind working to translate Clara's words into physical understanding. But Jacob caught on quickly, his face lighting up each time a principle clicked into place. "Can you teach us about horses too?" Tommy asked. "Like how you calmed Hank when he was scared?" "That's different. That's about reading what an animal needs and giving it to them." "Will you show us?" Clara glanced at Nathan, who nodded. "If Miss Boone's willing, I don't mind." They spent another hour working with Nathan's horses, Clara demonstrating how to approach a nervous animal, how to use voice and touch to communicate calm. The boys were naturals, their youth making them unafraid, and their genuine interest making them attentive. By the time the sun had climbed to mid-morning, both boys were successfully handling the horses with a confidence they hadn't possessed before. "All right," Nathan said, that's enough learning for one day. You two go play by the creek, but stay where I can see you." The boys ran off, their voices carrying back an excited chatter about everything they'd learned. Nathan turned to Clara. "Thank you for that. They've been talking about you non-stop since the gathering." "They're good boys. Smart." "They are." He paused. "I also came by to check on your ribs. You were hurting pretty bad last night." "I'm fine." "Clara." His voice held gentle exasperation. "You don't always have to be fine. You took a deliberate hit from a drunk fool and then danced for another hour. That's not fine, that's stubborn." Despite herself, Clara felt a small smile tug at her mouth. "Maybe a little stubborn." "Let me see." She hesitated, then unbuttoned her shirt enough to reveal the bruise. It had spread overnight, purple and black fading to green and yellow at the edges, covering an area the size of a dinner plate. Nathan's jaw tightened. That bastard. It looks worse than it feels. That's a lie, and we both know it. He looked up at her. Cutler did that deliberately. Everyone in that hall knew it. Doesn't matter now. It matters. Nathan's voice was quiet but firm. It matters because he thought he could get away with it. Thought there'd be no consequences for hurting you in front of the whole town. There won't be consequences. That's how it works. Maybe that's how it's worked. Doesn't mean it has to continue that way. Before Clara could respond, the sound of multiple wagons approaching drew their attention. Through the morning haze, she could see a small convoy heading toward her cabin. 4 wagons, maybe 5, carrying what looked like half the town. What in the world? Clara muttered. The wagons pulled up in a semicircle around her property. Clara recognized the faces. Sarah Palmer and her husband. The Wexlers. The Fletchers. Several other families from the gathering, along with some people Clara had helped over the years, but who'd never acknowledged it beyond a curt nod. Old Tom Warren climbed down from the lead wagon, his harmonica visible in his shirt pocket. "Morning, Miss Boone," he called. "Hope you don't mind the intrusion." "What's all this about?" "Well," Tom scratched his jaw, "we got a talking after the gathering last night. Got a thinking about all the times you've helped folks around here. Sarah reminded us how you helped build their barn addition last spring. Fletcher mentioned how you pulled his wagon out of the mud during the fall rains. The list got pretty long once we started remembering." Sarah Palmer stepped forward. "We also got to talking about how you've been living out here alone, doing everything yourself, and how that's not right. Not for someone who's been as good a neighbor as you have, whether the town acknowledged it or not." "I don't understand," Clara said. "We came to help," Tom explained. "Figured you might have projects needing doing, repairs, improvements, that sort of thing. Thought we'd spend the day being the neighbors we should have been all along." Clara stared at them, unable to find words. The gesture was so unexpected, so completely outside her experience with Red Hollow, that she couldn't quite process it. Nathan moved to stand beside her. "Clara's got a well that could use reinforcing," he offered quietly, "and I noticed some loose boards on the cabin's north side." "There's also the hen house she mentioned wanting to build," Sarah added. "Lord knows keeping chickens would make life easier out here." "I didn't," Clara started, then stopped. "I don't know what to say." "Don't have to say anything," Tom replied. "Just point us where we can be useful." The next few hours unfolded like something from a dream Clara wasn't sure she trusted. The men set to work reinforcing her well, their combined strength making quick work of what would have taken Clara days alone. The women helped plan and measure for the hen house, Sarah sketching out a design that was both practical and more elaborate than Clara had imagined. The children, including Tommy and Jacob, gathered stones from the creek bed for the henhouse foundation, turning the work into a game that had them laughing and competing. And Clara moved through it all in a daze, helping where she could, but mostly watching as her solitary life was suddenly, unexpectedly, invaded by community. "You look stunned," Nathan observed during a water break. "I am stunned. Yesterday, the town barely acknowledged I existed. Today, they're building me a henhouse. People can surprise you. Sometimes it just takes someone showing them it's safe to be decent." "You mean the dance?" "I mean you, refusing to be made small, refusing to fall when Cutler hit you, refusing to leave when you had every right to walk out of that hall and never come back." Nathan took a drink from the water bucket. "You showed them something they needed to see. Not everyone's ready to accept it yet, but enough are." By mid-afternoon, the well was reinforced with new stone and timber. The loose boards on Clara's cabin were secured, and the henhouse foundation was laid. The structure itself would take another day or two, but the hard groundwork was done. The women had also organized the food they'd brought, and suddenly Clara's simple cabin was hosting what amounted to a community meal. People sat on her porch steps, on upturned buckets, on blankets spread in the grass, eating and talking in the easy way of folks who'd worked together toward a common purpose. Clara found herself sitting between Sarah Palmer and Nathan, a plate of food in her lap that she was too overwhelmed to eat. "You should know," Sarah said quietly, "not everyone's happy about this. Martha Grimes made some pointed comments this morning about people wasting their time, and the mayor was none too pleased when he heard what we were planning." "I appreciate the honesty," Clara replied, "but there's more of us than there are of them. And we're tired of letting the loud voices drown out what's right. Sarah squeezed Clara's hand briefly. My grandmother used to say that a community's strength isn't measured by how well it treats its most comfortable members, but by how it treats the ones who don't quite fit the mold. Red Hollow's been failing that measure for a long time. Some of us would like to do better. The meal wound down as the afternoon stretched toward evening. Families began packing up. Children rounded up from wherever they'd wandered, tools gathered and loaded back into wagons. Tom Warren approached Clara as he was leaving. We'll be back day after tomorrow to finish that hen house, if that suits you. You don't have to. I know we don't have to. We want to. He tipped his hat. You've been a good neighbor, Miss Boone. About time we returned the favor. One by one, the wagons pulled away, leaving Clara and Nathan standing in the settling dust. You all right? Nathan asked. Clara looked at her property, the reinforced well, the repaired cabin, the foundation for a hen house she'd dreamed about but never thought she'd have. Evidence of community, of belonging, of being seen as something more than a curiosity or a burden. I don't know, she admitted. I keep waiting to wake up and find out this was all just wishful thinking. It's real. The well's real, the hen house is real, and so is the fact that people are starting to see you differently. Starting being the key word. You heard Sarah. Not everyone's happy about this. No, Nathan agreed. But change never makes everyone happy. What matters is whether enough people are willing to stand up for what's right. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun sink toward the western ridges. I should get the boys home, Nathan said finally. But I'll be here day after tomorrow with everyone else to finish the hen house. Nathan, you've already done so much. I'll be here, he repeated firmly. Get used to it, Clara. You're not alone anymore. He called for the boys, who came running from the creek, and loaded them into the wagon. As they pulled away, both boys waved enthusiastically, their voices carrying back in cheerful goodbyes. Clara stood in her yard until the wagon disappeared from sight, then turned to survey her property with new eyes. She was admiring the stonework on the well when she heard another wagon approaching. Assuming someone had forgotten something, she turned with a welcoming expression that died when she saw who was driving. Mayor Garrett pulled his wagon to a stop, Cutler sitting beside him on the bench. Two other ranch hands Clara recognized from the gathering sat in the back. The welcome Clara had felt moments before evaporated, replaced by wariness. Miss Boone, Garrett said, not bothering to climb down. Heard you had quite the work party today. People were kind enough to help with some projects. That's one way to put it. Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. Another way would be to say you've been stirring up trouble, making folks feel obligated to waste their time and resources on someone who's perfectly capable of taking care of herself. I didn't ask for anyone's help. Maybe not directly, but that little show at the gathering, dancing when you knew the floor couldn't properly support you, making a spectacle, that was calculated to make people feel sorry for you. Claire's jaw tightened. The floor held just fine. This time. But you're pushing your luck, Miss Boone, and you're pushing this town's patience. Garrett leaned forward slightly. We've got a way of doing things here. A natural order. Men do men's work, women do women's work, and people stay in their proper places. You don't fit that order, and forcing yourself into it makes everyone uncomfortable. I'm not forcing anything. I'm just living my life. Are you? Garrett's voice hardened. Or are you trying to prove something? Make some kind of point about how the town's treated you wrong? The town has treated me wrong, Clara said quietly. But that's never been about making a point. That's just been about surviving. Cutler spoke up, his words slightly slurred. You embarrassed me at that gathering. No, Clara replied, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. You embarrassed yourself. You deliberately slammed into an injured woman and expected her to fall. When she didn't, that's on you, not her. You calling me a liar? I'm stating facts. Cutler started to climb down from the wagon, but Garrett put a hand on his arm. Easy, the mayor said. We're here to have a civil conversation, not start a brawl. His eyes never left Clara. Here's the thing, Miss Boone. This town's got a balance to it. Everyone's got their place. You've been content with yours for years, living out here, keeping to yourself, helping when asked, but not making waves. Lately, though, you've been upsetting that balance. By dancing? By accepting help from neighbors? By making people choose sides? There's folks who think what happened at the gathering was you standing up for yourself. And there's folks who think it was you putting on airs, acting like you're something special. Garrett shrugged. Me? I'm just trying to keep the peace. And peace means everyone knowing their place. And what's my place exactly? The one you had before Nathan Cole decided to make you his charity project. Helpful when needed, but not expecting to be treated like you're one of us. Because you're not, Miss Boone. You never have been, and pretending otherwise just makes things harder for everyone. The words landed like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to wound. Clara had spent years building up defenses against this kind of cruelty, but hearing it stated so baldly, with such casual certainty, still hurt. I think you should leave, she said quietly. We're leaving. But I want you to think about something. Garrett gathered his reins. This little rebellion of yours, it won't last. People will get tired of pretending you fit in. The novelty will wear off, and you'll be right back where you started. Except now you'll have gotten folks' hopes up for nothing. Save yourself the disappointment, know your place, and stay in it. He snapped the reins and the wagon rolled forward. As it passed, Cutler leaned out and spat in the dirt near Clara's feet. Freak, he muttered. The wagon rumbled away, leaving Clara standing alone in her yard with the mayor's words echoing in her ears. She stood there for a long time, watching the dust settle, feeling the familiar weight of isolation pressing back down on her shoulders. For a few hours, she'd allowed herself to believe things might actually be changing. That the community gathering, the work party, the genuine kindness, that it all meant something real. But Garrett's visit was a reminder that change in a place like Red Hollow came slowly, if it came at all, and that there were people invested in keeping things exactly as they'd always been. Clara walked to her well, newly reinforced by people who'd given their time and labor freely, and drew up a bucket of cold water. She drank deeply, then splashed some on her face, washing away dust and sweat and the sting of tears she refused to shed. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful, the way frontier sunsets always were, but tonight Clara couldn't quite appreciate it. She was heading inside when she heard hoofbeats approaching. For a moment she tensed, thinking Garrett had returned. But the rider who emerged from the dusk was Nathan, alone on horseback. He dismounted quickly. Saw Garrett's wagon heading back to town. He came here? How did you... Tommy saw them heading this direction when we got home. I came back to make sure everything was all right. Nathan's eyes searched her face. What did he say? Nothing I haven't heard before, just dressed up in prettier language. Clara saw... He's right, you know. The words came out harder than she intended. About the balance. About me not fitting. I've spent my whole life not fitting, and one dance at a town gathering doesn't change that. One dance was just the beginning. Or it was an anomaly. A moment that felt bigger than it was because I wanted so badly for it to mean something. Clara looked at him, this man who'd shown her more kindness in a few days than the rest of the town had in years. You should go, Nathan, before Garrett decides you're as much of a problem as I am. I don't care what Garrett thinks. You should. He's got power in this town, and he's not shy about using it. Let him try. Nathan's voice was steel beneath the quiet. I'm not backing down, and neither should you. This isn't your fight. Like hell it isn't. You think I don't know what it's like to be on the outside? After my father died and I was trying to keep the ranch going alone, you know who helped me? You did. Showed up one day with timber you'd cut and said you heard I needed a new corral fence. Spent 3 days building it with me, wouldn't take a penny in payment. Claire remembered. She'd heard through town gossip that Nathan was struggling, that the ranch was falling apart without his father's steady hand. She'd gone because it was the right thing to do, not because she expected anything in return. That's different, she said. It's not different. It's exactly the same. You saw someone who needed help and you gave it, no questions asked, no judgment passed. That's who you are, Clara. And if the town can't see that, can't value that, then the problem isn't with you. Pretty words don't change reality. No, but actions do. And the reality is that today, a dozen families came out here and worked alongside you. That's real. The Hen House Foundation is real. The people who are starting to see you as a neighbor instead of an oddity, that's real too. So is Garrett's threat. Then we deal with it. Together. Nathan stepped closer. I'm not walking away from this, from you. You've spent too long standing alone, and I'll be damned if I let Garrett and his cronies push you back into isolation. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this moment, this connection, this glimpse of belonging could actually last. But years of disappointment had taught her to protect herself, and the walls she'd built around her heart didn't come down easily. "You should go home to your boys," she said quietly. "They'll be wondering where you are." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with whether to push or give her space. He chose space. "All right," he said, "but I'll be here day after tomorrow, just like I promised, and every day after that if you need me." He mounted his horse and rode away into the gathering darkness, leaving Clara alone once again. She went inside and lit her lamps, moving through the familiar routines of evening in her solitary cabin. But tonight the solitude felt different, less like peace and more like loneliness. She sat at her table and looked at her hands, these strong hands that could lift what four men couldn't, that could build and mend and create. Hands that had always been enough for survival, but never quite enough for belonging. Outside, the prairie night settled in with its familiar sounds. Crickets singing, wind through grass, the distant call of a coyote somewhere out in the darkness. Clara had lived with these sounds for years, had made her peace with solitude, with being apart rather than a part of. But now, having tasted something different, having felt what it was like to dance without mockery, to work alongside neighbors, to be seen as valuable rather than strange, going back to solitude felt impossible. She thought about Garrett's words, "Know your place and stay in it." And she thought about Nathan's response, "The problem isn't with you." Somewhere between those two perspectives lay her truth, and Clara realized she was going to have to decide which voice to believe. The lamplight flickered, casting shadows on the cabin walls. Clara's ribs ached with each breath, a reminder of Cutler's deliberate cruelty and her own stubborn refusal to fall. She'd spent her whole life not falling, not breaking, not giving the town the satisfaction of seeing her diminished. Maybe it was time to stop merely surviving and start actually living. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Clara banked her fire and prepared for bed, but sleep was a long time coming. She lay in the darkness, listening to the prairie night, and made a decision. She would see this through, would accept the help with the henhouse, would continue working alongside her neighbors, would take up the space Nathan insisted she was entitled to. And if Garrett wanted a fight, she'd give him one. Not with fists or in anger, but with simple, persistent existence. With refusing to be pushed back into the margins. With believing that she deserved the same dignity and belonging as anyone else in Red Hollow. It wouldn't be easy. Change never was, especially in a place as set in its ways as this frontier town. But Clara Boone had never chosen easy. She'd chosen survival and strength and the stubborn refusal to let the world make her smaller than she was. Tomorrow, she would continue that choice. And the day after, when the work party returned to finish the henhouse, she would welcome them with open hands and an open heart. Because Nathan was right about one thing. She'd stood alone long enough. It was time to see what standing together might feel like. The morning Clara had been both anticipating and dreading arrived with clouds gathering over the western mountains, promising rain by afternoon. She was up before sunrise, moving through her cabin with nervous energy that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the decision she'd made in the darkness 2 nights ago. She was still committed to it, to taking up space, to accepting help, to refusing to be pushed back into isolation. But commitment didn't erase the fear that Garrett had been right, that this was just a temporary kindness that would evaporate once the novelty wore off. The sound of wagons approaching reached her just after breakfast. Clara stepped outside to find the same convoy from before, plus a few additional families she hadn't expected. The Johnsons had come, their 4 children already tumbling out of the wagon bed. Even the Hendersons, who'd never shown her anything but cold courtesy, were there with lumber strapped to their wagon. But it was the absence that struck her most. Martha Grimes and her husband weren't among them. Neither were several other families who'd been at the first work party. The division Garrett had warned about was already visible in who showed up and who stayed away. Nathan arrived last, Tommy and Jacob bouncing with excitement in the wagon bed. "Ready to finish this hen house?" he called. Clara found her voice. "Ready as I'll ever be." The work began in earnest, the men measuring and cutting lumber while the women organized materials and kept the children occupied with tasks that made them feel helpful. Clara worked alongside them, her strength useful for the heavy lifting, but her uncertainty making her careful not to overstep or take over. Sarah Palmer noticed. "You don't have to hold back, you know. This is your hen house. You're allowed to have opinions about how it gets built.
I don't want to seem ungrateful. Having preferences isn't ungrateful. It's practical. Sarah handed her the sketch they'd worked from. Now, did you want the nesting boxes on the east wall or the west wall? East gets morning sun, but west stays warmer longer in winter. Clara studied the drawing, touched by the detail Sarah had put into it. East wall. The hens will appreciate the morning warmth. East wall it is. The work progressed with the easy rhythm of people who knew their tasks. Tom Warren and Mr. Fletcher framed the walls while Nathan and Mr. Palmer worked on the roof structure. The women measured and cut chicken wire for the run, their conversation flowing between practical matters and gentle gossip. Clara found herself drawn into it naturally. Her opinions sought on everything from the height of the roosts to the best way to protect against predators. It was such a small thing, being asked what she thought, but it felt monumental. They'd been working for about 2 hours when a wagon rolled up that made several people stop mid-task. Mayor Garrett climbed down, his expression carefully neutral. Cutler and 2 other men stayed in the wagon, watching with undisguised hostility. "Quite the operation you've got going here," Garrett observed, surveying the partially built henhouse. Tom Warren straightened from his work. "Just being neighborly, Sam. Thought you'd approve of folks helping each other out." "I approve of honest help. I'm less enthusiastic about political statements disguised as charity work." "Political statements?" Sarah Palmer's voice carried an edge. "We're building a hen house, not staging a rebellion." "Are you?" Garrett's eyes moved from person to person, landing finally on Clara. "Because from where I stand, this looks like you're all making a point, showing solidarity with someone who's been stirring up trouble." Nathan set down his hammer with deliberate care. "The only trouble being stirred up is by folks who can't stand seeing people treated with basic decency." "Decency?" Garrett's laugh was sharp. "Is it decent to make everyone in town feel like they have to choose sides? To divide the community over one person's need for attention?" "That's enough," Claire's voice cut through the tension. She stepped forward, placing herself between Garrett and the others. "This has nothing to do with them. If you've got a problem, it's with me." "Oh, I've got a problem," Garrett agreed. "My problem is watching this town get split apart because you can't accept your place in it." "My place?" Claire repeated the words slowly. "You keep talking about my place like it's something fixed and natural, like there's some law written down somewhere that says I'm supposed to live on the edges and be grateful for scraps of acknowledgement. There are natural orders. There's nothing natural about cruelty dressed up as tradition." Claire's voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath it. "I've lived in Red Hollow for 8 years. I've helped build barns, pull wagons from mud, mend fences, and sit with the sick. I've done the work of community without being given the benefits of it. And the only thing that's changed recently is that some people finally decided to acknowledge that. You embarrassed Cutler at the gathering? Well, Cutler embarrassed himself by attacking an injured woman and expecting her to fall. I simply didn't give him the satisfaction." From the wagon, Cutler's face reddened. "You calling me out in front of everyone? I'm stating facts. You slammed into me deliberately. Everyone in that hall saw it. The only embarrassment is that you thought it was acceptable behavior. Now you listen here." Garrett stepped closer, his voice dropping to something more threatening. "You might have fooled some soft-hearted folks into thinking you deserve special treatment, but I see right through it. You're trying to make this town feel guilty for treating you the way you deserve to be treated." "And how's that?" Nathan had moved to stand beside Clara, his presence a quiet support. "How does she deserve to be treated, Sam?" "Like what she is, an oddity. A woman who doesn't fit and never will, no matter how many people you convince to pretend otherwise." The words hung in the air like poison. Several people had stopped working entirely now, watching the confrontation unfold. Sarah Palmer spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. "That's a terrible thing to say. It's an honest thing to say. And honesty is what this situation needs." Garrett looked around at the assembled group. "You all think you're being kind, being good neighbors, but what you're really doing is encouraging someone to want things she can't have. Belonging, acceptance, a normal life. It's cruel, giving her false hope like that." "The only cruelty here," Tom Warren said quietly, "is yours, Sam." "Is it? Or am I the only one willing to speak the truth?" Garrett turned back to Clara. "You're not like other women. You never will be. And building a hen house or dancing at a gathering won't change that fundamental fact. The sooner you accept it, the sooner this town can get back to normal."
Clara felt the words strike deep, finding all her old wounds and pressing against them. This was what she'd feared, that Garrett was right, that she was fooling herself thinking anything had really changed. But then she felt Nathan's hand brush against hers, a gentle reminder of his presence. Saw Sarah Palmer's face set in determined anger. Noticed how Tom Warren had positioned himself between Garrett and the henhouse like he was protecting something valuable. And she realized something crucial. Garrett wasn't here because he was confident in his position. He was here because he was threatened by what was happening, by the visible proof that his version of how things should be wasn't the only possible version. "You're right about one thing," Clara said finally. "I'm not like other women. I'm stronger. I'm taller. I take up more space. Those are facts." She paused. "But the conclusion you've drawn from those facts, that I deserve less respect, less community, less belonging, that's not fact. That's choice. Your choice. And it says a lot more about you than it does about me." Garrett's expression hardened. "You think you're clever. I think I'm done listening to you tell me who I am. I know who I am. I'm someone who shows up when people need help, who keeps her word, who works hard and asks for little in return. If that's not enough to earn a place in this community, then the problem isn't with me. It's with the community." Big words from someone who's been on the outside for 8 years. Maybe, but I'm not on the outside right now. Clara gestured to the people around her. "Right now, I'm standing with neighbors who decided that basic decency matters more than maintaining some cruel status quo. You can call it political if it makes you feel better, but really it's just people choosing to be kind." Garrett stared at her for a long moment, and Clara saw the calculation in his eyes. He'd come here expecting to intimidate, to divide, to reassert his authority. But it wasn't working, and he knew it. "This isn't over," he said finally. "I didn't think it was." He climbed back into his wagon, and Cutler snapped the reins hard enough to make the horses jump. They pulled away in a spray of dirt and gravel, leaving an uncomfortable silence in their wake. For a moment, no one moved. Then Tom Warren picked up his hammer. "Well, that roof isn't going to build itself." The tension broke. People returned to their tasks, though the easy conversation from before was slower to resume. Clara could feel the weight of what had just happened, the way Garrett's visit had forced everyone to consciously choose sides instead of just doing a good deed. Nathan touched her elbow gently. "You all right?" "I don't know. I just publicly defied the mayor in front of half the town. That's either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever done." "It's the rightest thing you've ever done." He squeezed her arm briefly. "He's scared, Clara. That's why he came here. He sees what's happening, people thinking for themselves instead of following his lead, and it threatens him. He could make trouble for all of you. Let him try. We're not backing down." The work continued, but Clara noticed the changes. People spoke in lower voices, cast occasional glances toward town as if expecting more trouble. The easy joy from earlier had been replaced by something more determined, more defiant. By early afternoon, the henhouse structure was complete. It stood solid and square, bigger than Clara had dared hope, with proper nesting boxes and a secure run for the chickens to roam safely. The women had even added small decorative touches, a coat of whitewash on the walls, a painted sign that read Boone's Hen House in careful letters. Clara stood looking at it, this tangible proof of community and care, and felt tears prick at her eyes. "It's beautiful," she managed. "It's practical," Sarah corrected with a smile. "But I suppose it's a bit beautiful, too." The families began packing up their tools as the first drops of promised rain started falling. The children were loaded into wagons, protesting that they wanted to stay and see the chickens that would eventually occupy the new structure. "We'll bring some hens by next week," Tom Warren promised Clara. "Got some good layers that'll get you started." "You don't have to." "I know we don't have to. We want to." He lowered his voice. "What you said to Garrett today about knowing who you are and not letting him define you, that took courage. Real courage. Don't let him make you doubt it." One by one, the families departed, offering quiet words of encouragement and promises to return. By the time Nathan's wagon was the last remaining, the rain was falling steadily. "Boys, get under the canvas," Nathan called. Tommy and Jacob scrambled into the wagon bed and pulled the waterproof cover over themselves, their faces peering out from beneath it. Nathan turned to Clara. "Come into town with us. That storm's going to get worse before it gets better, And you shouldn't be alone out here after what happened today. I'm not afraid of Garrett. I know you're not, but fear isn't the only reason to accept help. He glanced at the darkening sky. Sometimes you accept it because it's offered, and because being alone isn't always the same as being strong. Clara looked at her new hen house, at her cabin, at the life she'd built in isolation. Then she looked at Nathan, water already dripping from his hat brim, waiting patiently for her answer. "All right," she said. "Let me get a few things." She packed a small bag quickly and locked her cabin, then climbed up onto the wagon seat beside Nathan. The boys cheered from under their canvas, clearly pleased she was coming along. The ride to town was slow and wet. The road had turned to mud, and Nathan drove carefully to keep the wagon from sliding into the ditches. Rain drummed against the canvas covering the boys and soaked through Clara's coat, but she didn't mind. There was something companionable about sharing discomfort, about moving through the storm together instead of weathering it alone. They passed several homesteads on the way, smoke rising from chimneys despite the rain. At the Henderson place, Clara saw Mrs. Henderson watching from her window, and for once the woman raised a hand in something that might have been a wave. Small things. But small things added up. Red Hollow appeared through the rain like a watercolor painting, edges blurred and indistinct. Nathan drove straight to his ranch on the edge of town, pulling the wagon up to the barn. "Boys, get inside the house and get dry," he ordered. "Start the fire if it's gone out." Tommy and Jacob scrambled down and ran for the house, their laughter carrying back through the rain. Nathan helped Clara down from the wagon, his hand steady on her waist. For a moment they stood there in the rain, close enough that Clara could see water droplets caught in his eyelashes. "Thank you," she said, "for standing with me today. I'll stand with you every day if you let me." There was weight in those words, meaning beyond simple friendship. Clara felt it settle between them like something precious and fragile. Before she could respond, the sound of horses approaching made them both turn. Through the rain, Clara could see riders, at least half a dozen, heading toward them at a pace too fast for the weather conditions. Nathan's hand found hers. "Get inside." "No, if this is about me, I'm not hiding." The riders pulled up in front of the house, water streaming from their hats and coats. Clara recognized them all, Garrett in the lead, Cutler beside him, and several other men who'd made their disapproval clear over the years. "Nathan Cole," Garrett called out, his voice carrying over the sound of rain. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About the choice you're making, the side you're choosing." Garrett's horse shifted nervously, sensing its rider's tension. "You're a respected rancher, Nathan. Got a good reputation, 2 fine boys. You really want to throw all that away over her?" "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm making a friend welcome." "A friend?" Garrett's laugh was ugly. "That what you're calling it? Because from where we sit, it looks like you've lost your damn mind. First the dancing, now bringing her into your home. People are talking, Nathan. Let them talk. It's not just talk anymore. It's dividing this town. Families who've been neighbors for years are picking sides, and it's all because you decided to make some kind of statement." Nathan's grip on Clara's hand tightened. "The only statement I'm making is that I judge people by their character, not by whether they fit some narrow definition of acceptable. Clara's got more character in her little finger than most people I know, and if that bothers you, that's your problem. It becomes my problem when it affects the whole town." Garrett leaned forward in his saddle. "I'm trying to give you a chance here, Nathan. Walk away from this now, send her back to her cabin where she belongs, and we can all forget this foolishness ever happened. And if I don't, then you'll find out what it's like to be on the outside, to have your credit pulled at the general store, to have no one willing to help when you need it, to watch your boys grow up as outcasts because their father couldn't see sense." The threat was clear and ugly, and Clara felt it land like a punch. This was what she'd feared, that standing with her would cost Nathan everything he'd built. "Nathan," she said quietly, "maybe you should—" "No." His voice was firm. "I'm not backing down. Not from this. Not from you." He looked up at Garrett. "Do your worst, Sam. Pull my credit, turn people against me, make my life difficult. I don't care. Because at the end of the day, I'll still be able to look my boys in the eye and know I did what was right." "You're a fool." "Maybe, but I'm a fool who can sleep at night," Cutler spoke up, his voice rough. "You think you're better than us, Cole? Think you're some kind of hero?" "I think I'm someone who treats people with basic decency.
If that makes me better than you, that's something you should examine. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the ground to soup and making the horses stamp and snort. Clara could feel the tension building, could sense how close this was to turning violent. "We should go inside," she said. "All of you are getting soaked for no reason." "We're not done here," Garrett said. "Yes, you are." Nathan's voice left no room for argument. "You've made your threats. I've made my choice. There's nothing left to say. You'll regret this." "I doubt it." For a long moment, Garrett stared down at them, and Clara could see him weighing his options. He'd come here to intimidate, to force Nathan into submission. But it wasn't working, and doubling down now would only make him look weak. "Let's go," he finally said to his men. "Let them figure out what they've done when the consequences come due." The riders wheeled their horses and headed back toward town, water spraying from their hooves. Nathan and Clara stood in the rain watching them go, still holding hands. "You shouldn't have done that," Clara said quietly. "You shouldn't have chosen me over your standing in this town. I didn't choose you over anything. I chose what was right. There's a difference." "Is there? Because right now it feels like you just painted a target on your back." "Then we'll both have targets." He turned to face her fully. "I meant what I said in there. I'll stand with you, Clara, whatever comes." The rain continued falling, soaking them both through, but neither moved toward shelter. "Why?" Clara asked. "Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" "Because I do know you. Maybe not all your history or your favorite color or what you dream about at night, but I know who you are where it matters. I've seen how you treat people, how you show up when needed, how you refuse to let cruelty make you cruel in return." Nathan reached up and brushed rain from her face with gentle fingers. "And maybe because I'm tired of standing by and watching good people get hurt, while bad people face no consequences. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I asked you to dance, and I don't regret that, Clara, not for a second." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the rain showed no signs of letting up. "We should get inside," Nathan said finally, "before we both catch our deaths standing out here having philosophical discussions in a storm." Clara let him lead her to the house, where warmth and firelight waited. The boys had indeed gotten the fire going, and they looked up eagerly when Nathan and Clara entered, dripping water all over the floor. "Is everything all right, Papa?" Jacob asked, worry evident in his young face. "Everything's fine. Go get some towels for Miss Boone." While the boys scurried off, Nathan built up the fire and Clara stood as close to it as she dared, trying to absorb the heat through her soaked clothing. "You can change in my room," Nathan offered. "I've got a shirt that'll be big enough, and we can hang your wet things to dry." "Nathan, I can't." "You can and you will. No arguments." Tommy and Jacob returned with towels and curious expressions, and Clara accepted both with as much grace as she could muster while water pooled around her boots. In Nathan's room, she changed quickly into the shirt he provided. It hung loose even on her frame but was blessedly dry. She toweled her hair as best she could and emerged to find Nathan had changed as well and was setting out bread and cheese for a simple meal. The boys were full of questions about the confrontation they'd witnessed from the window, but Nathan deflected them skillfully, turning the conversation to the henhouse and all the work that had been accomplished that day. As the storm raged outside and darkness fell early, Clara found herself in the strange position of sitting at someone else's table, sharing their meal, being part of their family circle. It should have felt uncomfortable. Instead, it felt like coming home. After the meal, the boys began nodding off despite their best efforts to stay awake. Nathan sent them to bed with promises that Clara would still be there in the morning. Alone with Nathan in the firelit kitchen, Clara felt the weight of the day settling onto her shoulders. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait and see how serious Garrett was about his threats." Nathan poured coffee for both of them. "My guess is he'll try to make things difficult for a while, see if he can pressure me into backing down. When that doesn't work, he'll move on to other tactics. I could leave, go to another town, start over somewhere else." "You could." Nathan set a cup in front of her. "But would you be running toward something better or just running away from this fight? Does it matter?" "It might. Running away leaves Garrett in power, confirms his version of how things should be. Staying and fighting back, even if it's just by continuing to exist and refuse to be diminished, that challenges everything he believes." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup.
I'm not sure I'm brave enough for that kind of fight.
You held a gate against wind and cattle. You danced after taking a deliberate hit that would have felled most people. You stood up to the mayor in front of half the town. Nathan's eyes met hers across the table. You're plenty brave enough. You just need to believe it. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the territory, rain pounding against the roof and wind rattling the windows. But inside, in this small kitchen with this quiet man who saw her truly, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt hope. Not the fragile, easily shattered hope that came from wishful thinking, but something stronger, more substantial. Hope built on actions instead of words, on people who showed up instead of just talking about it, on the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could have the belonging she'd always wanted. It wouldn't be easy.
Garrett wasn't done making trouble, and there would be people in town who sided with him. The fight ahead would be long and difficult. But sitting here in Nathan's kitchen, warm and dry and welcome, Clara thought that maybe it was a fight worth having. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. You don't have to thank me for doing what's right. Maybe not, but I'm going to anyway." They sat together in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and listening to the storm, while outside the rain washed Red Hollow clean, and inside, something new and precious was beginning to take root. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the world washed clean and glistening. Clara woke on Nathan's spare cot in the boys' room, disoriented for a moment before memory settled back into place. She'd stayed the night, in Nathan Cole's house, with his children sleeping peacefully in their beds nearby. The impropriety of it would have scandalized the town under normal circumstances, but these weren't normal circumstances anymore. She rose quietly and padded into the kitchen to find Nathan already awake, coffee brewing on the stove. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much either. "Morning," he said softly. "Coffee's almost ready." "You didn't have to get up so early." "Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what Garrett might do next." He poured 2 cups and handed her one. "I've been going over the ranch accounts. If he pulls my credit at Morrison's, I'll need to find another supplier. Might have to go to Silver Creek, 2 days' ride from here." "Nathan, I can't let you lose everything because of me. Stop." His voice was gentle but firm. "This isn't about you causing problems. This is about Garrett showing his true colors. If he's willing to hurt my family to maintain his control, that says everything about who he is." Before Clara could respond, footsteps thundered down the stairs, and Tommy burst into the kitchen, still in his nightshirt. "Miss Boone, you're still here." "Barely," Jacob said from the doorway, yawning. "The sun's barely up." "But she's here. Papa said she would be, and she is." Tommy beamed at both of them with the uncomplicated joy of a child who hadn't yet learned that the world was more complicated than promises kept. They ate breakfast together, cornmeal porridge with honey and dried fruit, and Clara marveled at how natural it felt, this domestic scene. Like she'd been part of it all along instead of an outsider looking in. After breakfast, Nathan hitched the horses to take Clara back to her cabin. The boys begged to come along, and he relented with the warning that they'd need to help with chores when they returned. The road was a mess from the storm, muddy ruts and standing water making the journey slow. But the morning was beautiful despite it, the air fresh and the prairie grass sparkling with raindrops that caught the early light like diamonds. When they crested the rise that brought Clara's property into view, she gasped. The henhouse still stood, solid and white against the green landscape, but someone had been there during the night. Her garden plot had been trampled, plants torn up and scattered. The new well reinforcement had been partially dismantled, stones pulled loose and thrown aside, and painted across the side of her cabin in rough letters were 2 words: "Freak House." Nathan's jaw tightened. Those bastards. Clara climbed down from the wagon slowly, taking in the damage. It wasn't catastrophic. The cabin itself was intact, and the henhouse had been spared, but the message was clear. This was the consequence Garrett had promised. "Papa, who did this?" Jacob asked, his young voice trembling with anger. "Cowards," Nathan replied. "The kind of men who do their meanness in the dark because they're afraid to face the light." Tommy had climbed down and was picking up the scattered plants with careful hands. "We can fix it, can't we?" "Yes," Clara said, finding her voice. "We can fix it." And they did. For the next 2 hours, they worked together to repair the damage. Nathan and Jacob restacked the stones at the well, while Clara and Tommy replanted what could be saved from the garden. The paint on the cabin was oil-based and wouldn't come off easily, but Nathan promised to bring whitewash to cover it. They were nearly finished when more wagons appeared on the road. Clara's heart sank, expecting more trouble. But as the wagons drew closer, she recognized friendly faces. Tom Warren in the lead, Sarah Palmer beside him, the Fletchers, the Wexlers. Even some families Clara didn't know well, all converging on her property. Tom climbed down and surveyed the damage with grim determination. Heard about this from the Hendersons. They saw riders heading out this way in the middle of the night. Figured we'd come see if you needed help setting things right. You don't have to, Clara started. We know we don't have to, Sarah interrupted. We're choosing to. There's a difference. What followed was a flurry of activity that left Clara speechless. The men finished the well repairs and reinforced them even stronger than before. The women worked on the garden, salvaging what they could and replanting the rest. The children gathered the scattered stones and debris, turning it into a game to see who could collect the most. And through it all, people kept arriving. Families Clara had helped over the years, some she'd never spoken to, all showing up with supplies and determination. By mid-morning, the damage was erased. The garden was replanted. The well stood stronger than before. And someone had brought enough whitewash to cover not just the painted words, but the entire cabin wall, making it fresh and new. Clara stood looking at her property, at all these people who'd given their time and labor, and felt something break open in her chest. I don't understand, she said to Nathan. Why are they all here? Because Garrett overplayed his hand. He thought destroying your property would scare people back in line. Instead, it showed everyone exactly who he is. Nathan gestured to the gathered crowd. These are decent people, Clara. They just needed someone to show them it was safe to act on their decency. Tom Warren called for everyone's attention. Folks, I think we need to talk about what happened here last night. This wasn't just vandalism. This was an attack meant to intimidate and frighten. And I don't know about you all, but I'm tired of letting fear dictate how we treat our neighbors. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sam Garrett's been running this town like his personal kingdom for too long, Sarah Palmer added. Making people afraid to step out of line. Punishing anyone who doesn't fit his narrow view of acceptable. Well, I'm done with it. I'm done pretending that cruelty is just the way things are. Here, here, someone called out. But what can we do? Mrs. Fletcher asked. He's the mayor. He's got influence and money. And we've got numbers, Tom interrupted. We've got votes. We've got the power to choose different leadership if we decide to use it. The conversation that followed was passionate and heated, people voicing frustrations that had clearly been building for years. Stories emerged of other times Garrett had used his position to punish or control, other people who'd been pushed to the margins for not conforming. Clara listened to it all in amazement. She'd thought her experience was unique, that she alone had been singled out for exclusion. But hearing these stories, she realized the problem was bigger than her. Garrett's cruelty had touched many lives, and her situation had simply been the breaking point. We should call a town meeting, Mr. Wexler suggested. Put everything out in the open. Let people see what's really been happening. Garrett will just talk his way out of it, someone objected. He always does. Not if we all stand together, Nathan said. Not if we refuse to let him divide us anymore. The decision was made. A town meeting would be called for the following Saturday. In the meantime, people would spread the word, gather support, and document Garrett's abuses of power. As the crowd dispersed, Clara found herself surrounded by people offering words of encouragement and solidarity. Mrs. Henderson, who'd never shown her anything but cold courtesy before, gripped her hand tightly. I'm sorry, the older woman said. I'm sorry I let fear make me unkind. You deserved better from all of us. Clara squeezed back, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. By the time everyone had left, the sun was high overhead and Clara's property looked better than it had before the attack. The cabin wall gleamed white. The garden was lush with replanted rows. Even the henhouse seemed to stand a little taller, a symbol of community and resilience. Nathan and the boys stayed to share lunch, the four of them sitting on Clara's porch, eating bread and cheese while the prairie wind dried the last of the morning's dampness. What happens at the town meeting? Tommy asked. Will there be a fight? No fighting, Nathan assured him. Just talking, honest talking about how we want our town to be. Will people listen? Some will, some won't. But enough will, I think, to make a difference. The week that followed was unlike anything Clara had experienced. Every day, people stopped by her cabin, sometimes to help with small projects, sometimes just to talk. She learned names and histories, heard stories, and shared her own. The isolation she'd lived with for 8 years began to crack and crumble, replaced by something warmer and more substantial. Nathan came every day, often with the boys, sometimes alone. They worked together on ranch tasks and cabin improvements, their partnership becoming so natural that Clara sometimes forgot what life had been like before it. On Thursday evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, Nathan said quietly, "Whatever happens at that meeting, I want you to know something." "What's that?" "This." He gestured between them. "This matters to me. You matter to me. Not because of what you represent or what standing with you proves, but because of who you are." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Nathan, I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "I'm just telling you the truth. You're strong and kind and brave, and spending time with you has reminded me what it feels like to look forward to tomorrow." She didn't have words adequate for the feeling swelling in her chest, so she reached over and took his hand instead. They sat that way as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, two people who'd found each other across the divide of loneliness. Saturday arrived with clear skies and nervous energy. The town hall filled early, people claiming seats and standing room along the walls. Clara arrived with Nathan and his boys, her stomach churning with anxiety. Garrett was already there, positioned at the front with Cutler and his other supporters arranged around him like guards. When he saw Clara enter, his expression hardened. The meeting was called to order by Tom Warren, who'd volunteered to moderate. He stood at the front, looking smaller than usual but determined. "We're here today to talk about the future of Red Hollow," he began, "about what kind of community we want to be. I think we all know why this meeting was called, but let's be clear, this isn't about one person. This is about all of us." Garrett stood. "If this is about the Boone woman stirring up trouble, this is about you, Sam," Sarah Palmer interrupted, rising from her seat. "About years of you using your position to control and punish people. About creating a town where fear matters more than fairness." "That's absurd." "Is it?" Tom pulled out a piece of paper. "Because I've got a list here. Martha Grimes, whose husband lost his contract with the town when he questioned one of your decisions. The Fletcher family, who couldn't get credit at the store after their daughter married someone you didn't approve of. The Hendersons, who... Those were business decisions. They were punishment," Tom said firmly, "and everyone in this room knows it." What followed was 3 hours of painful honesty. Person after person stood and shared their stories of how Garrett had used his influence to maintain control. Some stories were about Clara, but most weren't. They were about a pattern of behavior that had turned the town into a place where conformity mattered more than character. Garrett tried to defend himself, to explain and justify, but the sheer weight of testimony against him was overwhelming. Finally, Clara stood. The room fell silent. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said quietly. "I didn't want to be the reason the town divided. I just wanted to live my life, help when I could, and maybe belong somewhere." She looked around at all the faces watching her, some friendly, some neutral, some still hostile. "Mayor Garrett is right about one thing. I am different. I don't fit the normal pattern of what women are supposed to be like. I'm too tall, too strong, too much in a lot of ways," she paused. "But being different isn't the same as being wrong. And treating people with cruelty because they don't fit your expectations, that's what's actually wrong." She turned to face Garrett directly. "You've spent years making people feel small so you could feel big. Making people afraid so you could feel powerful. But real power doesn't come from fear. It comes from respect. And you've lost the respect of this community." Garrett's face was red with fury. "You think you can come here, disrupt everything, and—" "She didn't disrupt anything," Nathan said, standing. "She just existed. You're the one who turned her existence into a problem." "He's right," someone called from the back. "Agreed," another voice added. The murmurs of support built into something stronger, a groundswell of people who'd finally found the courage to speak up. Tom Warren raised his hands for quiet. "I think it's clear that this community needs new leadership. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in Mayor Garrett, to be followed by a special election." "You can't do that," Garrett started. "Actually, according to the town charter, we can,"
Sarah Palmer said. All it takes is a majority vote from the citizens present. The vote was overwhelming. Garrett lost by a margin that left no room for argument. As the reality of it sank in, Garrett's bluster finally broke. He looked around at the sea of faces, at the people he'd controlled through fear and intimidation, and saw that his power had evaporated. "You'll regret this," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Maybe," Tom replied, "but I doubt it." Garrett stormed out, Cutler and a handful of supporters following. The door slammed behind them with a finality that felt like the end of an era. The meeting continued with discussions of the special election, of changes needed in how the town operated, of healing the divisions that had been created. Clara participated, her voice joining the others in shaping what Red Hollow might become. When it was finally over and people began filing out, Clara found herself surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. People thanked her for her courage, apologized for their previous behavior, and made promises to do better. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Outside, the evening air was cool and sweet. Nathan waited with the boys, who'd spent the meeting playing quietly in the back. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Clara looked at him. This man who'd seen her when everyone else looked away, who'd stood with her when it cost him, who'd shown her what it felt like to be valued. "Actually," she said, "I was thinking maybe we could all go to your place, if the invitation's still open." Nathan's smile could have lit the whole prairie. Always. They walked together through the settling dusk, Tommy and Jacob running ahead, while Nathan and Clara followed at an easier pace. "What happens now?" Clara asked. "Now we figure out what comes next. The town heals, people learn to be better, life goes on." He glanced at her. "And maybe, if you're willing, we figure out what this is between us." "I'd like that." "Good. Because the boys have been asking when you're going to teach them more about working with horses, and I've been wondering when you'd let me take you to dinner in Silver Creek, and—" Clara laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. "One thing at a time." "Fair enough." They reached Nathan's ranch as the first stars appeared. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, and Clara felt something settle in her chest that she'd never quite felt before. Peace, belonging, home. The days that followed brought more changes. A special election was held, and Tom Warren was chosen as interim mayor. New town ordinances were drafted to prevent future abuses of power. And slowly, carefully, Red Hollow began to transform into a community that valued all its members. Clara's henhouse was filled with chickens from Tom Warren, just as he'd promised. Her garden flourished under her care, and the occasional help from neighbors who stopped by to visit. The cabin with its fresh white wall became a gathering place for people who wanted to work on town projects or just sit and talk. And Nathan was there through all of it, his quiet presence a constant in her days. They took things slow, both of them aware that what they were building needed a solid foundation. But the feelings grew stronger with each shared meal, each evening on the porch, each moment when their hands would brush and linger. 3 months after the town meeting on a warm summer evening, Nathan asked Clara to marry him. He did it simply, without grand gestures, just the two of them sitting on her porch watching the sunset. "I love you," he said. "You and the life we're building together. I want to make it official, if you'll have me." Clara looked at this man who'd changed everything, who'd shown her that she didn't have to choose between being herself and being loved. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll have you." They were married a month later in a ceremony at the town hall, the same building where Clara had once stood alone against the mayor's cruelty. But now it was filled with friends and neighbors who'd come to celebrate two people who'd found each other across the divide of loneliness. Sarah Palmer cried through the whole ceremony. Tom Warren played his harmonica. The children ran wild with joy while their parents looked on indulgently. And when Nathan kissed his bride, the entire town cheered. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Clara moved into Nathan's ranch, her cabin becoming a storage building for equipment and supplies. Tommy and Jacob gained a mother who could teach them about strength and gentleness in equal measure. The ranch prospered under the combined efforts of all four of them working together. Red Hollow continued to change, slowly learning to value diversity over conformity, kindness over cruelty. It wasn't perfect, change never made everyone happy, but it was better, more honest, more true to what a community could be when it chose to see people for who they really were. One evening, nearly a year after the wedding,
Clara stood in the ranch yard watching Tommy and Jacob practice the gate-holding technique she'd taught them so long ago. They'd grown taller, stronger, more confident, and they'd grown knowing that strength came in many forms, that being different wasn't something to fear or mock, but something to celebrate. Nathan came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how much has changed. About how different life is now from what I thought it would be." "Better different or worse different?" Clara leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "Better. So much better than I ever imagined." In the distance, the prairie stretched toward mountains painted purple by the setting sun. Somewhere in town, life continued its evening rhythms. And here, on this ranch that had become her home, Clara Boone Cole felt something she'd searched for all her life. She felt like she fit, not because she'd changed to accommodate the world, but because the world had finally grown big enough to accommodate her. The boys finished their practice and ran over, breathless and laughing, full of stories about their day. Nathan released Clara to listen to them properly, but kept one hand linked with hers. And as the four of them walked toward the house together, their shadows stretching long in the evening light, Clara thought about the woman she'd been, the one who sat alone on benches while the town flowed around her, the one who'd believed she was too big for any space to hold her. She'd been wrong. She'd never been too large for the town. The town had just needed time and a little courage from a few good people to grow big enough for her. And now, finally, there was room for everyone.